Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf kuf bet. Today's daf is sponsored by Ronika Relic in honor of her daughter Abigail, a Talmidah Chachama who loves learning Gemara and encouraged me to do the same via the tannaitic challenge. Today's daf is sponsored by Judy Felber in loving memory of Yuval Mor Yosef and Yossi Cohen, who were killed in a terror attack at Kivat Asaf on their 7th year at site. And for the continual refuah shlema of their son, Netanel Ilan ben Shena Tzipora, who was critically injured in the attack. Okay, we're going to get started. As I mentioned yesterday, I'll mention again. Hopefully today, or we're still trying to get everything finalized, but the Siyum invite will go out. And as well, we're going to have, for intro to Masechet Menachot, a trip planned for a sadna, a workshop, in how to bake the breads of the Beit Mikdash, all the different mincha offerings. So that'll be on January 19th, and a Hebrew one on January 26th. And we'll see if there's a lot of requests. Maybe we'll add another time. Okay, so if it gets full right away, then we'll consider also doing another day in February. Okay, and also if you can't make it, we'll arrange something. Okay, let's get going. We started yesterday with the statement of Rav. Moshe Rabbeinu kohen gadol v'cholek b'koshei shamayim haya. So Moshe Rabbeinu, we said, was a kohen gadol according to Rav. And how do we know? Because in the Miluim, if you remember, the first 7 days, only Moshe works in the temple. That's in the Mishkan. All Moshe, he does everything. Just like the Kohen Gadol. That's where we get. He was a Kohen Gadol because he did all the Avodah. Then, on the 8th day, comes in Aaron and his sons. We don't see Moshe working in the temple after that. Well, Rav says he was a Kohen Gadol. And that's why he got parts in the days of the Miluim. And that just shows he was a Kohen Gadol. So now we start a slew of questions on this. And we're up to the third question. At the bottom of Kuf Aleph Amud Bet, last line. Tevet. Miriam, mihizgira. Miriam, when she got leprosy, who determined that she was a leper? Because if you remember, a kohen has to determine that she was a leper. Im tomar Moshe hizgira. If you say it was Moshe, Moshe zalhu. Moshe's not a kohen. Ding, ding, ding. There's our difficulty. We could end the source right here. Okay, ve'ein zar ro'eh negaim. A non-kohen can't check negaim, so it can't be Moshe. Now, what do you mean? We just said Moshe had kohen gadol status. If Moshe had kohen gadol status, of course he could check her leprosy. Ve'im tomar. Okay, now we're just going to finish the braita. Im tomar Aharon iskira. If you're going to say it was Aaron karovhu ve'ein karov ro'eh negaim. Aaron was relative. He can't check her negaim. He can't determine. You can't do it for a relative. Okay, obviously Moshe was a relative also, but Moshe had a bigger problem, which is he wasn't even a kohen. So obviously he's also a relative. They're all siblings. Ella, this is interesting in of itself. There's a lot of interesting things in this source. Okay, Gefet this week went up yesterday, is about this topic, about Moshe being a kohen gadol, how the story of Miriam sheds light on this whole issue, about Moshe's status. So if you want to delve into it more, you can listen to Rabbi Yehoshua shiur. But now we have another interesting element, which is Ela kavod gadol chalak lakadosh baruch hu leMiriam otasha. God went out and gave Miriam a lot of respect at that hour, even though it's interesting because she was being punished, right? And yet God was showing her a lot of respect. He said, "Ani kohen v'ani mazgira, ani chota v'ani potra." I'm going to do the whole thing. I'm going to function as a kohen. I'm going to determine I'm going to put her right. If you remember, first you do the lasgil, which is to quarantine. Then the chota, which is, then he determined you're definitely a leper. And ani potra, and I will say when you're done being a leper. This is like in the Haggadah, when it says ani v'lo malach, ani v'lo saraf, right? Sometimes God intervenes directly. And here he intervened directly. You have to question, right? It's a whole other shiur on what was special about Miriam and why, while she was getting punished, yet she was treated with this great respect. It's actually a theme. It's interesting. It just dawned on me right now that later we're going to talk about giving respect to kings who were bad kings. Like this idea that even within, where things aren't the way they're supposed to be, there's a level of respect that people need. If people who are deserving of that respect for whatever reason should get the respect they deserve. So Miriam obviously was deserving of respect from God according to this. I'm Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Katani Mia. Okay, that's the end of the braita. So again, there's a lot more to delve into here. We're not going to do that right now. But Katani Mia, what was the main problem with this line according to Rav? Because this braita says Moshe zar ve'ein zar ro'eh negaim. Right? He was a zar. What do you mean? Wasn't he a kohen gadol? So, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, very easy answer. Shani Morot Negaim, Da'aronu Banav Tuvim B'Parasha. In the section about Negaim, leprosy, it doesn't say kohen. If you remember, we had all the thing, every time it says etzba and kohen and all that, right? Many times in the Torah, it uses just the word kohen. But when it says Negaim, it specifically says Aaron and his sons. So that means it has to be someone from Aaron and his sons, or their sons, or their sons. And therefore, Moshe couldn't do it, even though it was a kohen gadol. So that's an answer to this difficulty. Tevet. By the way, I wanted to just make one point about Pinchas yesterday. I mean, in the end, Pinchas is a grandchild of Aaron. That's why I want to make it now. So what do you mean he wasn't a kohen? Right? We all know kohanim go, right, father to son to son to son. So how could you say Pinchas wasn't a kohen at the time? So this has to, and how can you say Moshe was a kohen? He wasn't from Aaron. So you have to break our concept. We know how it works because that's how it works now or soon after. But that's not necessarily how it worked in the desert. In other words, at the beginning, it was just Aaron and his sons. And here you see it, right? It's for leprosy also. But it's a little different. It just made me think about it. In the time of Aaron and his sons, it was Aaron and his sons. That was it. Not his grandsons. Okay? It was just Aaron and his sons. Only later did it become, okay, it's going to go from your children. In fact, maybe it's because Pinchas is offered Brit Kunat Olam, and from there it's going to stay in his family. It wasn't something that was so clear from the beginning. Okay. Fourth difficulty and final one. There were 5 reasons for Elisheva to be very happy. Yivama Melech, her Yabam. What's a Yabam? Well, it's her husband's brother, right? A potential Yabam. She didn't have to do Yibum. But it was, okay, who's Elisheva? She's Aaron's wife. She's the sister of Nachshon ben Aminadav, who was the Nasi of Shevet Yehuda. So, right, we were just talking about them this year, Nachshon. So she had 5 things she was very happy about, meaning 5 things going for her that she had better than other women. Her Yabam was a king. Okay, by the way, none of this is going to have to do with her. It's all going to do about her male relatives. Okay, her Yabam was a king, meaning Moshe, her brother-in-law, was a king. Okay, we haven't seen this before. Moshe was king. We'll get into that soon. Isha kohen gadol, her husband, was a kohen gadol. Now here you see the problem. Moshe, it doesn't say he was a kohen gadol. It says he was a king, not a kohen gadol. And specifically about Aaron, it says he was the one who was the kohen gadol. So that's the difficulty on Rav. But let's read the source anyway. Binaskan, her son, was the second in command to the Kohen Gadol. Ben Binah, Pinchas, was Meshuach Milchama. This comes up in Bamidbar Lamed Aleph, when they went out to war. He was considered the one in charge of the war. Okay, the Kohen, who's announces to everyone. I mean, later we see in Dvarim, the Meshuach Milchama makes the announcement, if you're scared, don't go out to war, etc. Ve'achia Nasi Shevet, and her brother was the head of a tribe. But however, she was sad because she was an Avelut because of her 2 sons. Now, why are they pointing about? First of all, the commentators ask, why are we pointing about Avelut about for her? What? There were other people who were Avelim on the 2 sons. So they said, not really, because no one else was allowed to be mitabel, because it was the 8th day of the Miluim and they had to work and they couldn't really be mitabel. So she was the one who kind of took the Avelut on her. She was the only relative who could really mourn for them. That's one point. My husband pointed out, I thought this was good, that what this really is saying is, often we look at people and we say, oh, those people have everything, right? They look like they have everything going for them, and you shouldn't do that because it's not always. You might look and say, oh, look, they have this, they have that. But look, she had this terrible tragedy that her 2 sons were killed, and that was balanced or kind of knocked off the balance of the simcha that she had. So even though she had all these great things, she was still in the end mourning for her children. Anyway, Katani Miyat, what does it say in that braita? Yevama Melech. Melech in Kohen Gadolo. It sounds like he was a king, but not a Kohen Gadol. Ema Af Melech. You could say he was also a king, because he had king over, right? Aaron was just Kohen Gadol. He was king and Kohen Gadol, so it just mentioned the king. But he also could be in a Kohen Gadol, and that's a way to respond. After we resolve these 4 braitot, okay, even though they seem to raise difficulties with Rav's statement, we resolve them all. But now we're going to see Kitanai, it's actually Machlokat Tanaim, in which case you don't have to go with all these resolutions. You could say all these sources are talking about a different opinion, and we're actually going to see 3 opinions about Moshe's status. Vayichar af Hashem b'Moshe. So now we're going to quote a pasuk where God gets angry at Moshe. This is when Moshe goes to the burning bush, and God starts talking to him and says, go to Egypt. And he says, I don't want to talk. I don't want it, right? I can't talk. And then God gets angry at Moshe. And it's a very strange pasuk because it says, I'm going to read it. It's Shemot chapter 4, verse 14. Vayichar af Hashem b'Moshe. God gets very angry at Moshe. Vayomer. And he says, all in the same pasuk. Hello, Aaron achicha Levi. Aaron, your brother, is a Levi. Yadati. Okay, first of all, he was a kohen, not a Levi. Okay, so let's deal with that. Yadati ki daber yedaber hu v'gam hinehu yotzei l'kvartecha v'ra'ava samach b'libo. Okay, I know he'll go talk for you. I have a solution. Okay, what's strange about this pasuk? Well, if God has a solution, like why was he so angry at Moshe? Right? And it almost sounds like I knew Meirosh. I knew this already. This is going to be. So what was the anger, right? The anger doesn't really go anywhere. Now we're going to learn in Rabbi Yehoshua and Korcha Omeil, Kol charon af b'Torah, every time it says Vayichar apo, someone gets angry, Ne'emar bo roshem. There's always some impact, something happens from the anger. But zeh lo ne'emar bo roshem, but this one doesn't have any, right? Because in the beginning of the pasuk, God gets angry, and at the end of the pasuk, God comes up with a solution. There's no results to the anger. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, Af zeh ne'emar bo roshem. No, you misunderstood the pasuk. It's actually, that is the response of God because of the anger. Shene'emar, halo Aaron achicha Levi. And now they talk about this. Aaron, your brother, is a Levi. Valo kohenu. What do you mean? He's a kohen. He's not a Levi. Hachi kamar. This is what God said to Moshe because he got angry at him. Ani amalti ata kohen v'hu Levi. I wanted to say that you be the kohen and he be the Levi, which makes a lot of sense, right? Moshe was the leader. He should be the one who's the kohen. And Aaron should be the Levi. That's why I said, Aaron, your brother, is the Levi. But now he's going to be the talker. He's going to become the Kohen because you're going to lose your... Like, in that moment, Moshe lost the kahuna. Achshav hu kohen v'ata Levi. Okay? He's going to be the Kohen, you're going to be the Levi. And that pasuk is punishment for Moshe. It's basically God's anger giving him a punishment. What do you see according to this opinion? Moshe was not a Kohen. Not at all. Maybe he did the work in the Miluim for whatever reason. But he wasn't a Kohen. V'chachamim omrim, second opinion, lo nitkahem Moshe ela shivat yemei miluim bilvad. Okay, he was a Kohen, but for 7 days, that was it. Temporary. No more than that. V'yesh omrim, third opinion, some people say, lo paska kehuna ela mizar osha Moshe. He was a Kohen for his entire life. The only difference is it didn't go to his children. Shene'emar, we're going to quote a pasuk from Divrei Hayamim, Moshe ish Elohim banav yikaru al shevet halevi. Moshe, the man of God. Now it doesn't say he's a Kohen here, but what does it say? His sons will be called Shevet Levi. That's trying to say Moshe wasn't, because he was called a Kohen, but his sons will be called Shevet Levi. It won't continue the kahuna to his children, or it didn't continue. Ve'omer, in another pasuk, in a minute they're going to say, why do you need both pasukim? This we say every Friday night, so it might be familiar to you. I don't know if you've thought about it ever, but Moshe v'Aharon b'kohanav u'shmua b'korei Shemot. Moshe and Aaron are kohanim. Oh, wait, there you see, right? Clearly, Moshe was a kohen. My vomer, why do you need the second pasuk? V'chitem alidorotu dichtiv. If you say the first pasuk, which says your sons will be called Shevet Levi, maybe it's just talking about his sons. It never said, but not Moshe, right? Because he's a kohen. He never said anything about Moshe really in that pasuk. Because Moshe was a man of God. And his sons will be called on Shevet Levi. Maybe it was just saying about the sons. It wasn't really saying anything about Moshe. Therefore, there it's very clear that Moshe was Kohen. Okay. Now we're going to go back. So just to get the structure, from here until close to the end of Amud Aleph, it's all going to be tangents on things that we discussed. So the structure is, Rav made the statement about Moshe's status, 4 tannaitic sources that raised the difficulty on Moshe being a Kohen gadol, resolved all 4, but then mentioned, by the way, it's machloket tanim. Was Moshe not a Kohen at all? Was he a Kohen just for 7 days? Or was he a Kohen actually for his whole life? And the only difference between him and Aaron is that it didn't continue to his sons. Okay, now we have to get off on a few tangents. The first is this charon af. What, really every time it says charon af, there's some impact, some result, something happens. V'chol charon af shebetorah ne'emar baroshem v'haktiv v'yetzeh me'im paro b'chari af. When Moshe goes to Pharaoh and says, Makat B'chorot is coming, firstborns are going to be killed, He says to him, and what's going to happen is, I'm predicting what's going to happen. Okay, I'll read you the whole pasuk, Shemot, chapter 11, verse 8. Yirdu kol avadecha ele elai. After this happens, all your servants are going to come to me. Vishtachavu li. They're going to bow down to me. Notice what's interesting. He leaves out Pharaoh from this pasuk. We're going to come back to that in a different context today. But they're all going to come and bow down to me, saying, Say ata v'chol ha'am asher b'raglecha. Get out of here. V'acharei chen etzei, and I will leave. And then it says, Vayetzei me'im Paro b'chariaf. And then he walks out from Paro very angry. Now, and that's the end of it. So there's no roshem. There's no, right? He goes out angry. He doesn't do anything with that anger. So it says here, right? V'lo amar le v'lo midi. And he doesn't say anything after that. That's the end of it. It's not like he punishes Paro after the anger. Amar Reish Lakish sterov yatsa. Reish Lakish says, when he left, he slapped him in the face. Okay? So the leaving, as he left, he slapped him in the face, and that was the result of his anger. So now the Gemara says, no way Reish Lakish could have said that. There's a machlok of Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan on a pasuk in the beginning of the Makod when he comes to the Yeor, right? Paro's by the Nile, and it says, God tells Moshe, "V'nitzavta likrato al sfati," or go out to him where he is standing on the Nile. Reish Lakish, why did he have to nitzavta likrato, go stand and walk out to him, right? As a sign of respect. Melechu v'izbir lo panim. He did it as a sign of respect. So how could he have slapped Paro in the face if he treated Paro with, if Reish Lakish's whole thing is, despite how terrible Pharaoh is, Moshe has to treat him with respect. That's what God's saying when he said, nitzavta likrato. You have to go out to him, okay, and show him respect. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Rashahu ve'is panav bo nitzavta likrato is he stood up against him. It's actually the opposite. Rabbi Yochanan says, what do you mean? Paro didn't deserve any respect. And when God says, go stand before him, he said, go stand in a brazen manner. Go out against him. Okay, be strong. So, but what do you see here? Reish Lakish is the one who thinks you have to show respect. So how could Reish Lakish have said that he slapped Pharaoh in the face? To which Gemara answers very simply, Ipuch, switch, who said what? Obviously, Reish Lakish was the one who said nitzavta likrato means go up against him, and Rabbi Yochanan was the one who said you have to show him respect. Amar Rabbi Yanai, lo olam tehei. Okay, so now that was the first tangent. Does charon af really always come with some sort of result? What about this pasuk? Oh, that pasuk actually shows the same thing because he slapped him as he left. Now, since we talked about this idea, though, through that we got to that Reish Lakish or maybe Rabbi Yochanan holds that you're supposed to show respect to the king despite it being a terrible king. Now we're going to talk about that. Amar Rabbi Yanai, lo olam tehei mat machut alecha. You should always be fearful of the king, okay, and show respect. Dichtiv v'yardu kol avadecha ele elai. Here we're going to prove it from the other part of that pasuk. What does it say? Right, the other pasuk we quoted for a different reason about the anger. It says in the beginning of that pasuk, who's going to come and bow down to me? Your servants, not Paro. That was a show of respect. Ilu lidide lo ka'amrle. He doesn't say to Paro, you're going to bow down to me. That would have been a lack of respect to say, you, the king, are going to come bow down to me. He didn't say that. He said, your servants will, out of respect. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Mehachi brings a different pasuk, and I want you to think about the differences between these two pasukim. V'yad Hashem hayta l'Eliyahu v'yashanes manav v'yaretz l'fnei achav. So God was with Eliyahu, and then he goes out and he runs in front of Achav. All right, when the president goes, right, there's a whole entourage. There's cars before, there's cars behind, right? A leader comes out. They don't come first. Somebody leads the way, and then the leader comes. So Eliyahu saw that nobody was walking in front of Achav, so he runs in front of Achav to walk in front of him as a sign of respect. Now, what do you see here? Okay, so what's the difference between the two? What you see here is both are bad kings, and yet respect was shown to them. And from there you learn you always have to have respect for the king. They actually use emat, like fear of the king, but fear of the king shows itself in respect. Now, difference, okay, Jew, non-Jew, okay, Jewish melech, non-Jewish melech. The other difference, and I'm sure there's more, you can think of other ones, but the ones that I noticed right away is that with Paro, he just doesn't mention Paro as a way of showing respect. He could have done something degrading, and he refrains from doing it. In the second one, he does a positive action to show respect. where he runs in front of him. So those are two different elements of how to show respect to someone. One is to not do something disrespectful, and the other is to do something that shows respect. Okay, next. If you want in the chat, you could write some other thoughts you have about this. Okay, now we're going to move on. Amar Ula, but we're still on tangents, because one thing we mentioned there was that her Yabam, Elisheva's Yabam, was a king, meaning Moshe was a king. Now, that source is going to be brought to raise difficulty on a statement we're going to see Ula makes right now, because Amar Ula, Bikesh Moshe Machut v'lo netanulo, no netanulo. Moshe wanted to be king, but they didn't allow him to be king. How do we know this? Dichtiv al tikav halom. Also back to the sneh. God says, don't come halom. Halom means like don't come close, don't come here. But halom, we're going to see, also comes up in the context of kingship. Ein halom ela malchut. Halom means malchut. Al tikav halom means you're not going to become king. Okay, don't try to get close to being king. It's actually ironic that in this section where Moshe is trying to say, I don't want to be the leader, they're claiming he wanted to be a king. And he's basically not given the kingdom. Shne'emar mi anochi Hashem Elokim ki avitani ad halom. Okay, how do they know halom connects with malchut? They bring a pasuk from David HaMelech. When David is told, Natan Nevi comes and tells him, your son's going to build a Beit Mikdash, and all your children forever are going to be the kings. So he says, wow, who am I, right? Who am I, God, that you brought me to this place? And halom means to this place, meaning that my kids are going to be kings. So that's kingdom. Mativ Rava. So Rava says, how could you say Moshe wanted to be king? It wasn't. What do you mean? Look at this source. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Yivamah Melech, or Yabam was a king. Amar Rava, lo ulizaro kamar. What he meant is, halom means you're not going to have kingship in your family for generations. You yourself will be king, but it won't continue after that. Wait a minute. Every time it says halom, it means it's going to continue for generations, like with David. I'm going to show you another pasuk where it certainly doesn't. V'hagabe Shaul, by Shaul HaMelech, who his son did not continue to be king, it says, Hava od halom ish. Okay, this is when they're searching for a king, and they're going through the Urim V'Tumim, all the people want a king in the beginning of Sefer Shemot. And it says, they kept asking, right? It fell on Mishpachat Kish, and then they said, Vayishalu Ba'Hashem, Hava od halom ish. Is there another ish halom? Okay, which is going to be kingdom. And then it says, Vayomer Hashem hinehu nichba l'kelim. If you remember, Shaul doesn't want it. Also, he runs away and he hides. So who in zaro lo? Now, if you're using the word halom about Shaul, his sons didn't continue. So we're going to have two answers to this. Ishboshet did take over. He was king for a while. If you remember, David is king and Ishboshet is king at the same time, right, in parallel. Or Shaul is different. Because even he didn't continue. He got kicked out from being king. So basically, it's not just that his sons, maybe he should have been, but he messed up. And because of that, he lost the kingship. And that's why his kids didn't continue. But theoretically, it should have been. This is a unique situation. This isn't like, you'll be king, but your son won't be. Even he stopped being king. And then we're going to talk about, because we mentioned this, and this is going to end this whole section, Kidja Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Chanina, B'sha'ah sheposkim gedula la'adam, poskim lo ulizaro at sof kol hadorot. When somebody loses greatness, like a person's in a position of leadership and they lose it, it ends from his, right? Not just he won't be, but all his future generations. And that's why Shaul ended up, his kids weren't, because he messed up, and then that was the end of it. Shenema, we prove it from a pasuk, Li'yigra mitzadik einav ve'melachim lakiseh. Okay, tzaddik will always continue. Like if you go in the right path, it will continue for generations, right? That your children will sit on the kisei malchut. But what causes you to lose it? If you become arrogant, right? That's always the terrible, right? And we all know from leaders, right? That's the biggest thing that ruins leaders. HaKadosh Baruch Hu mashpilo. If you become arrogant, God will put you down. And if you're tied in chains, you'll be taken away by the pains of poverty, and basically you'll be removed from your greatness. Okay, that's the end of that section. So 4 difficulties on Rav. Then we got off on Machloket Tanaim, and from there we got off on all these tangents about it's really all charon av has results. And then from there we got to you have to respect kings. And from there we got to this whole question back to Moshe. Was he really a king? What do you mean? That doesn't seem to go with what Ula said. And then we resolved all that. Okay. Now we're going back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah had said, Baalei Mumim, Bein Baalei Mumim, right? All kinds of Baalei Mumim get a portion of the food. Okay? The kohen's food, even though they don't work in the temple. Menane mile, where do we get this from? And now we're going to see drasha. We're going to have 4 braitot. Each braita builds on the previous. Okay? So if you remember, we said that really the Balei Mum aren't supposed to eat, but there's a pasuk, Kol Zachar B'Kohanim, right, can eat. So Kol Zachar includes someone additional. It's the Baal Mum, the one who's blemished. Okay, even though they don't do avod in the temple. So that's what we're going to see right now. Detana Rabbanan, Kol Zachar l'Rabot Balei Mumim. Kol Zachar includes the Balei Mumim also can eat. But they say, wait a minute. Lemai, ila achila, if you want to say it's including Balei Mumim to eat, which is the obvious, that they can eat sacrificial meat, Harei Kfar Ne'amar, Lechem Eloham Mikochei HaKodashim Yochel. That's a pasuk that says, Balei Mumim, it says explicitly, blemished kohanim are allowed to eat from the bread of God, which is the sacrificial items, right, from the Kochei HaKodashim. So it must be the Kol Zachar Yochlenu, even though it says they'll eat, Ela Lechalukat, means they're going to get a portion. It doesn't mean they're going to eat, yes, they can eat, and they're going to get a portion. Because those are 2 different things, right? Remember, we saw kids, for example, can eat, but they can't get a portion, right? So those are 2 different things. You need 2 different psukim to prove it. So the simple reading of the, you can eat, it says, Balei Mumim can eat, that's obvious, you can eat. But when it says Kol Zachar and there's a riboy to include Balei Mumim, that's about getting a portion. Second braita, tannaitic. Now that was a pasuk, Kol Zachar Yochlenu, we're going to see in chapter 6. Okay, the Torah switches is Parshat Tzav. The first beginning of Sefer Vayikra is all about the korbanot and the details from the perspective of the Jews who want to bring, the Yisraelim who want to bring. In chapter 6, it turns to the Kohanim and it starts telling all these laws of it's Torah Chatat, or Olah, Chatat, Mincha. Okay, well actually it's not the right order. It starts Mincha. I don't remember the order, but it basically goes into all the different korbanot. Beginning of chapter 7 is the Asham. So now we're going to go through the Mincha, the Chatat, and the Asham, and one of the things it's telling the Kohanim is Kol Zachar B'Kohanim Yochlena. Okay, so what do they get to eat? We're not talking about the Olah because they don't get to eat the Olah. We're talking about the Chatat. They get to eat the Asham. They get to eat in the Mincha, right? The Shayrei Mincha, the remainder of the Mincha offering. So the first one is in the Mincha because we're going in order. First one mentioned is the Mincha here. So it's to say the Balei Mumim get a portion. But that's mentioned specifically in the Mincha. So, but it should be obviously for anything they're going to get a portion of. So now we're going to say, well, why does it also say Kol Zachar by the Chatat? And then it says it also by the Asham. So each time we're going to add something else. So the second braita starts off and says, tannaitic. Kol Zachar, it's now quoting the next pasuk. This is in verse 22 in chapter 6, in the Chatat. Kol Zachar, again, right? Each Zachar in the... I'll read the whole pasuk, right? Kol Zachar B'Kohanim Yochal, will eat. L'Rabot Balei Mumim. Okay, but we already have Balei Mumim, right? Lemai, ila achila, if it's to eat, we already know. Harei Kfar Amor. That's in the pasuk in chapter 21. Lechaluka, if you want to say they got a portion, Harei Kfar Amor. We just said that from the Mincha. Sheachol, well, what might you have thought? Ein li ela tam v'naseh Baal Mum. Maybe only a kohen that was fine and then became a Baal Mum. Maybe they can eat. But Baal Mum yikaro, but maybe someone who was born as a blemished person maybe can't eat. Can't get a portion. Can't get a portion. Talmud Lomar, Kol Zachar. The extra pasuk adds, even if they were blemished from birth. Okay, tannaitic, fourth one and last one. Kol Zachar l'Rabot Baal Mum lemai. Now we're going to go through again. Each one builds on the previous. Ila achila harei kfar amor. If it's eating, we already know that from chapter 21. Ila chaluka harei kfar amor from chapter 6, the beginning. Ila Baal Mum yikaro, born as blemished, harei kfar amor, and the sin offering. Sheachol, and this is by the Asham, the guilt offering in chapter 7. So why is there an additional pasuk? Sheachol ein li ela Baal Mum kavua. Maybe it's only one who has a blemish that's not going to go away. Baal Mum over minai. And how do you know if it's temporary that he can also get a portion? Talmud Lomar, Kol Zachar. So that adds temporary. Gemara says, Plapelai, it should be the opposite. The temporary is lighter. You would assume they get a portion. It's the one who has the permanent one that you would think would be worse. Just like, the one who became blemished rather than was born blemished. So Amar Rav Sheshet Ipuch. Rav Sheshet says, okay, fine, switch the order. It was just a mistake. But Rav Ashi Amar Lo Olam Lo Tepuch. No. Leave it in that order. It actually makes sense. Sal Kadat Tachanili, you might have thought, turning out Amubed, Ki Tameh. Maybe it's like a person who's impure. Ma Tameh Kamadelo Tahor Lo Achil. A Tameh doesn't get a portion and they can't eat until they become Tahor. Af Hainami Kamadelo Mataken Lo Achil. Maybe you would say because this person will eventually be able to get a portion because the blemish will go away, because it's only temporary, maybe you have to wait until the blemish gets better to allow them to get a portion. Kamashmalan, that's why that's the bigger chiddush. If they're blemished completely and it's never going to permanently, then we can understand why we give them a portion. But if it's temporary, maybe you think you wait till it gets resolved, just like an impure person. But no, that's why it says kol zachar in the asham, to include even a temporary blemished kohen also gets a portion. Okay, that was all about 4 drashot to say what is each time it says kol zachar, the 3 times it says it, what is each one adding. Okay, now we're going to go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah had said kol she'eino ra'oi doesn't get a chelik. If you can't work in the temple, eino ra'oi la'avodah, if you can't work in the temple, you don't get a portion. V'lo, but not harei ba'amum delo ra'oi la'avodah v'cholek. But what about a blemished kohen? They can't work and yet they get a portion. Remember, we already asked this question in the Mishnah, right? And we resolved this by saying what? That, right? We dealt with this question. There's a special drasha, okay? But we'll get back to that. V2, here's a further question. Now, they're assuming that you can make an inference from this. If you say, if you can't do the work in the temple, then you can't get a portion. It would presume to say, ha ra'oi la'avodah cholek. If you could work in the temple, then you do get a portion. But we're going to have a difficulty with that too. So we have 2 difficulties. One is the Baal Mum is a difficulty on the statement. And the Tameh in Korbanot Tzibor is going to be a problem with the inference. Hare Tameh b'Korbanot Tzibor, Tameh Kohen, who's working for communal offerings. Remember, Tumahutra b'Tzibor, when we have, let's say, the majority of the Kohanim are Tmeim, we allow the Kohanim to do the Avodah. Divra oil Avodah, ve'eno cholek, but he's not going to get a portion because he's Tameh. So they change it. They say, okay, fine. Change the words in the Mishnah, 1 word. Ra'oi la'achila kamar. What we meant is he's capable of eating. If you can eat, you can get a portion. If you can't eat, you can't get a portion. Okay, but we're going to have a difficulty with this. Okay, we saw this also before. Hare katan de ra'oi la'achila ve'eno cholek. But a katan can do the avodah. Can eat and doesn't get a portion. So that doesn't work. So they say, okay, don't. Now, this was all a problem with the inference. It only said in the Mishnah, if you can't do the avodah, you can't get a portion. It never said, if you can, you can. So, halo katane, they just say simply, it never says, if you can eat, you can get a portion. Because that's just not true, and didn't say it, so you don't have to infer. So now they say, hashdali lahachi. Well, then, you didn't have to change the words to ra'oi lachila. Why did we change it to ra'oi lachila? Because it didn't work with the Tameh b'Korbanot Tzibor. But now that you just said, it never says if you're not ra'oi, if you are ra'oi, if just like you can't say ra'oi lachila gets a chalukah, you also, it never said in the Mishnah, ra'oi lavodah gets a share, and which raised a difficulty for the Tameh. So they say, Lo'olam kedamar mi'ikara, so let's go back to, right? Hashdati lahachi. Now that you already answered that answer, let's go back and just erase the earlier inference, and we don't even have to change the wording to ra'oi lachila. We could say, anyone who can't do avoda can't get a portion. And the Mishnah didn't say how ra'oi does, and therefore we don't have a difficulty. So, right, imishum tameh, tameh lo katani. If you want to say, oh, but what about the tameh? Well, it just doesn't say that because it never says the inference. V'imishum ba'almum. Now we still have the ba'almum problem, but that we know is not a problem because Rahman Rabbi. Because even though he's not right way to do the avodah, he still gets a portion. That's because there's a special pasuk which includes him anyway. Okay, and with that we resolve that. Okay. Afilu tameh b'shat zrikat damim v'tor b'shat ikter chalavim eno cholek. So now the Mishnah said if you're tameh at the time of zrikatam, but you're tahor when they burn the parts on the altar, it doesn't matter. You don't get a portion because, now, what's the main thing that seems to come out of here? The most important time where you have to be pure in order to be able to get a portion is sprinkling of the blood. Now this fits in with all sorts of other things we've learned, right? That the burning of the Avarim is not critical. The sprinkling of the blood is where it all happens. Okay. So again, they make an inference, and then they're going to have a difficulty on this inference, just like we did 2 minutes ago. So what if you're pure when it comes time to sprinkle the blood, but you already become impure, you become impure later before they burn the parts on the altar? Sounds like you get a portion because the whole time that matters, the only time that matters, is this rikatam. That's what they assume from the Mishnah. In which case they say, if you're going to make that assumption, Manitin deloka Abba Shaul, our Mishnah does not fit with Abba Shaul. The Tanya, as it says in a braita, Abba Shaul clearly disagrees with this. Abba Shaul omer, lo olamino ochel ad sheyeh tahor mishatzrika ad shadik ter chalavim. It's not only do you have to be pure at the time of the zrikat dam, you have to be impure from then until the time of the also then and also, right, ad shadik ter chalavim. We're going to see how literally we take this in a minute. But until you burn the parts on the altar. Okay, it says in the pasuk, the one who sacrifices the dam hashlamim, the blood, and the chelev, which are these parts you have to burn, mibnei Aharon, from the sons of Aaron, lo tiyeh shokeh yamin lemaneh. He gets the shok, that's of the shlamim. What do you see from here? It mentions also the chelev. So afilu ekter chalavim nami ba. You also have to be able to do the ekter chalavim. So if you came impure and can't do the burning of the chalavim, you can't. Comes Rav Ashi's question, which we're going to end with a teiku. By Rav Ashi, nitma ben tayim mahu. Now notice what he said. He said from the time of the zrikat dam until the time of the burning of the parts of the fats. Now, does that mean you have to be tahor that entire time? Does it mean from then the whole time span? Or what if you were fine at the zrikat dam, you became impure, you went to the mikveh, sunset, you burned the parts because you could burn the parts at night. And when you burn the parts, he already was pure. So, what would be the case? Do we say, you just need to be, we need you at both actions to be pure, and he was. Or does it have to be a continuum? And the answer is teiku, we don't have an answer. Okay. Now we have a long end to the daf, but we are at the end of the daf, and we're going to get into an interesting, at the end of the Hebrew shiur, they said, after all these complicated dapim, they want to just like throw in a funny story, even though it's not exactly a funny story, or it's not exactly, but it is something a little different. It's a little complicated, long-winded, but here goes. I'm a Rav. Rav says, Hi Dina me Rabbi Lezar Rabbi Shimon Gemirna da Amar bebeit hakisei. Very strange. He says the following logic we heard from Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon. He came up with this in the bathroom. Okay, I was thinking, in the bathroom, like they didn't have phones to read, they didn't have books to read, they didn't have other things to do. He obviously was in the bathroom for a while, and he has this whole long, because you'll see it was a while, because it's going to be a long thought he had. And we're going to get back to the very last line is what do you mean? You're not allowed to learn Torah in the bathroom, you're not allowed to think Torah thoughts in the bathroom. How did that happen? But we'll put that aside for now. So he has this whole long-winded argument to explain about a tful yom. If you remember, a tful yom goes to the mikveh in the morning, sometime during the day, has to wait till Harev Shemesh. On that day, if it's his turn to be in the temple, it's his mishmar, and he becomes impure, he can't get a portion. Now here we're going to come up with an argument between two kohanim, okay? It's like a creative thing he comes up with in his head. Here's this logical argument we could have between a kohen who's a tful yom, who's on duty that week, wants to take a portion, and the kohen who's pure says to him, no, you can't get a portion. Okay, we're going to have him try a few different lines of, they're all actually similar lines of argument, but with different parts of the korban he wants to get, or different korbanot. So here goes. Bat tful yom, va'amal. So the tful yom comes and says, Tein li mi mincha, v'ocha. Give me part of the mincha, and I'm going to eat it. Remember, the remainder of the mincha offering is given to the kohen. Amar lo. Now, before I read this, you have to get some background. If a kohen gets portions only if he's on the mishmar that week. But if it's not your turn and you're a kohen and you want to eat part of let's say a sin offering, and you have your own sin offering, you can bring your own sin offering to the temple. And you can say, I want the meat of my sin offering, even though it's not your week. Obviously, you can't bring a sin offering unless you owe it. But let's say you owe a sin offering. You can come to the temple when it's not your week, bring it. You can say, I want to sacrifice it myself and I want to eat it. Okay? And you can get the meat even though it's not your week. A mincha, if I'm a kohen and I decide I want to bring a voluntary mincha offering, now what did I say? The mincha, the kometz gets burned, the rest goes to the kohanim. But not with a mincha of a kohen. A mincha of a kohen kalil tiyeh. The entire thing gets burnt. It's like a korban ola. So if a kohen, voluntarily brings a mincha to the temple, the whole thing gets burnt. Why is this relevant? Well, where does the kohen have more likely we're going to use the words yipa kocho and hura kocho. Where does he have more power or less power? He has more power actually to get a chatat, because a chatat, he can bring his own and get the rights to eat it. A mincha, even if he brings a voluntary offering, he doesn't have any rights to a mincha, right? If it's not his week, he won't ever get a mincha, okay? There's no way, because the Yisrael's mincha goes to the people on that week, and so he's much weaker when it comes to the mincha. So that's what this whole line of argument is going to be based on in the beginning. Tful Yom says, Tain li mi mincha v'ochal. Give me from the mincha and I'm going to eat. Amarlo, the kohen tahor, says to him, what are you talking about? Of course not. Now, they're starting with a given assumption, which we're going to come up with later, that he definitely can't get a portion of the sin offering of that week's portions. Okay? So the Tful Yom says like this, the kohen tahor says like this. Man b'kom she'ipah kochacha b'chatatcha. Now, in general, kohanim have more rights to a chatat, because if they bring their own chatat, they can eat the meat. Dichiticha mechatat Yisrael, and even in a place where you theoretically have a lot of power, I can tell you, no way you can't take any portion of the chatat this week. And that we're going to see later where he gets that from. We don't know yet where, but that is a given right now. Makom shu ra kochacha b'minchatcha, but in a mincha, where you can't just come and say on a random week, I want to bring a mincha and eat it, because you won't be able to eat anything from it. You're obviously weaker in a mincha, so of course I can tell you, no way can you have a part of this mincha of the Yisrael. To which the Tful Yom can say, what are you talking about? Now, I'm going to read it inside, but I want to just tell it to you outside so you understand. He's basically saying, my power in the chatat, that's strong and weak in the mincha, is the exact same power that you have in the chatat and is weak in the mincha. So don't tell me that you have more power than I do, because in terms of the whole argument you just brought, that I have less rights to a mincha than a chatat, because I can bring my own mincha, I can bring my own chatat and eat, and I can't bring my own mincha. You're in the exact same boat as me. So that doesn't give you any more power than it gives me. Okay? Let's read it inside. I get that you pushed me off and said I can't eat a chatat. But you're trying to say you have more power than me in that area. But you tried to say, oh, you have more power in a chatat, and even that you can't get. But you have the same power as I do in that. And then you're going to say, push me off from a mincha, I can push you off. You don't even have any koch in the mincha either, just like I don't. So how could you take it away from me? Now, and this is going to be the same thing that's going to happen in all these arguments, going to have logic, knock each other out. Comes the kohen tahor and says, but there's a pasuk. Okay, forget logic. What does it say? The kohen who sacrifices it to he will get it. And now he's sarcastic. And what does he say? Bo hakrei ve'echol. So come, sacrifice it, and then you can eat. Which of course he can't, because he's a Tful Yom. He can't go into the temple and sacrifice. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing with the chatat. Now we're going to get to what's the pasuk where we're going to end up proving the chatat he can't eat, which was the basis of the previous, and it's going to actually be arguing for the mincha. Tenli mechatat Yisrael v'ochal. So now he says, okay, I want the chatat at least. Amarlo uma b'mkom shu ra kochi. Now comes the kohen tahor and flips it. He says, oh, I'm so weak in a mincha because I can't bring my own mincha offering, and yet, right, b'minchati. But dichiticha mi mincha Yisrael. But I had enough power to knock you out and say you can't have the mincha, which we just proved. Makom she'ipach kochi b'chatati. So where I'm stronger in a chatat, ein odin shadichacha mi chatat Yisrael. I have the power now to knock you out and say you can't get a portion in the chatat. To which the Tful Yom says, Amarlo, ma'im dechitan, the same argument he makes before, which is my power and your power are the same in chatat and mincha. Don't try that on me. You're stronger than me in there. In dechitani mincha Yisrael, I get that you knocked me off in the mincha. Fine, you proved that already. But kashem shua kochacha kachua kochi. You said, because you're weak, and still you can push me off, I'm just as weak as you are. And to dicheni mechatat Yisrael, what, you're going to push me off from chatat Yisrael because you said I'm strong where it comes to the chatat? Kshem shipak kochacha, kachi pak kochi. I'm also strong when it comes to a chatat. I could also bring my own chatat offering and eat it. Again, not when he's a Tful Yom, but theoretically in a general case. So he knocks out his logic, comes the kohen tahor, the pure one, and says, Harei Omer, ha-kohen ha-mechate ota yochlena. Same type pasuk. The kohen who does the blood, he's the one who eats it. Bo chatei vochel, come sprinkle the blood and then you can eat it, which of course he can't. Third case, Amar lo, ten lo mechazeh v'shok vochel. I want you to give me from the chazeh v'shok. Those are the two parts of the shlamim that the kohen gets. Amar lo. Uma, this is a little different. Ma minkom she'ipach kochacha b'chatatcha. Now, again, it starts at the chatat. You have a lot of strength in the chatat, and yet, dichiticha mechatat Yisrael. I pushed you off and I said you can't get. Makom shu ra kocha b'shlamim. Now, you're weaker in the shlamim. Why are you weaker in the shlamim? Now, this is obviously any kohen, but You're weak because chazev shok, you have much less power because you don't get all the meat. Most of the meat goes to the owner. All you get is the chest and the thigh. So I can push you off from them because you don't even have so much there to begin with. Of course, what's he going to read? Right? We said, so now he gives a different kind of answer. He says, you're pushing me off from a chatan. You said, oh, I had power in a chatat? I don't have that much power. Now he's going to undo the logic of you have less power in a shlemim. He says, in a chatat, I can't even share it with my wife and children. But chazev shok, I can do more with it. I can give it to my family. Because it's not kol zachar b'kohanim. All, right, the kohanim get it. They can share it with their families. So you can't tell me that I have less power in the shlemim. I actually have more power in the shlemim. So again, he pulls out a pasuk, and with this we'll end the first line of arguing. These 3 points that Rabbi Shimon says. Harei omer lakohen hazorek adam shlemim lo yeh. Boz rok ve'echol. Same idea. The kohen who sprinkles the blood, he will get the chazev shok, and come sprinkle the blood, which of course he can't do. Okay. Now here comes the best line. Yatzat tful yom kula v'chamura v'rosho onem yimino mechusar kapara mismolo. The tful yom goes out with his kulas and chumras on his head, meaning he didn't get anywhere with his logical arguments, and he's a nonain on his right, he's a mechusar kapara on his left, meaning a nonain and mechusar kaparim, if you remember, can't eat kudshim. So he basically can't eat any kudshim, okay, and he doesn't get any portion. Now comes the parich Rav Achai. Rav Achai comes and says, Lemale, why don't you add another one? Okay, you could say maybe he got out of the bathroom by that point, but you say, why don't you add another one? There was another one to add. Why didn't you say, give me from the firstborn? And now he's going to make another argument that Rabbi Shimon said by the Bechor. Mishum da amarle, because the response could be, no, you can't get it because mabim kom shua kochi b'chatati, in the chatat I have less power. It's on the shai v'avadah. But once he gave that whole thing, well, the chatat is limited because only the males can eat it. You can't share it with his family. And yet tichiticha mechatay Yisrael, and right, I rejected you. Makom shipa kochi b'bechor. Now, in a place where I have more power, the Kohen Tahor says, because tekule dilihi, I can do whatever I want with the bechor. It's my complete property. I can share it with anyone I want. Tidicheni mi bechor, right? So now, I skipped the line. Ein odin shadechami menu, right? Obviously, I can push you off from the bechor. I have more power there. So again, now the Tful Yom is going to say, what do you mean? I have the same power as you have. Exactly, right? Right? You're claiming the weakness you had in Chatat, I also had that weakness. The strength you had in Bechor, I also have that strength. So don't knock me out from there. That doesn't give you any more power over me. Harei Omer, comes now the clincher pasuk, et amam tizrok al mizbech, chabam tachtir b'saram yelach, sprinkle their blood on the mizbech, burn their fats on the altar, this by the Bechor, and then you will get the meat. So what does it sound like? If you sprinkle the blood, you can do it, right? Bo zerok ve'echol, come sprinkle the blood and eat. So why don't you use that one? Idach parich, the other one can answer, that pasuk is different from all the others. Notice what it says differently. Miktiv u'besaran l'kohen hazorek. It doesn't say the one who sprinkles the blood gets it, like it said in all the others. HaKohen ha'mechateh yochlena, right? The one who does it gets it. Here it just says, do these actions, and it will be for you. But it's not necessarily clear that the you is that same you who did it. It's not as direct as the others. And therefore, afilu l'kohen acher. It could be l'chayeh. It means any kohen can get it. And that's why he didn't argue that point. Now the clincher line. How did he do this? You can't have any Torah thoughts in the bathroom or the bathhouse. Leon so shani. Great line. It just popped into his head. He couldn't stop his thoughts. It wasn't intentional. It just happened. Okay, I don't know if this happens to you, that you have these crazy kavachomers in your head while you're in the bathroom, but happens to great rabbis like Rabbi Shimon, and that's how we explain it. Why Rav had to point out that this all happened in the bathroom, I don't know, but leaves it open for thought. Okay, so quick review. We had the Rav, Moshe was kohen, 4 difficulties. We already summarized that part, and then the tangents off that. Then we went to the Baalei Mumim. What's the source for all these Baalei Mumim get portions? Then we went to the 4 different drashot that we saw. Then, one for Achilah, then for Chalukah, and then for a mum that's from birth even, and then from a mum, we had 2 different versions, either that's permanent or that's temporary. Then we had the Kol She'eino Ra'oi, and then we had some difficulties both on that and the inference. We rejected the inference, and we resolved the difficulty of the blemish one because there's a special drasha. Then we got to the tamei, right? Can you make that inference, right? Does it have to be it goes against Abba Shaul, who says you have to be in both. And then we had the question for Rashi, which wasn't answered. And then we ended up with these lines of argumentation between a Tful Yom and a Kohen Tahor about a Tful Yom trying to claim I should have rights to the meat, but in the end, or the portions, but in the end he's always rejected based on a pasuk, not by logic. By logic, right, it went back and forth, but in the end, Kohen Tahor always pulls out a pasuk and can argue against him. And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.